Clara's hands remained steady as she walked Officer Miller toward the squad car, his head hung low in defeat. The crowd that had once been a silent witness to his brutality now buzzed with murmurs of disbelief. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's Clara May, the chief of the district." The truth had finally dawned on them. This wasn't just any woman. This was the very person Miller had wronged. And now the full force of her authority was descending upon him. The officer's knees trembled as Clara pushed him gently into the back seat of the squad car. He was no longer the proud, imposing figure he had been just moments ago. Now he was nothing more than a disgraced officer, someone who had let his arrogance and racism destroy his career. As Clara closed the car door behind him, she could feel the weight of what had just happened. She had acted quickly, and the law had been on her side. But there was something else at play here, something personal. This wasn't just about enforcing the law. This was about standing up against an entrenched system of racial prejudice, about showing the world that it wasn't enough to turn a blind eye when abuse occurred. The moment was bittersweet. She knew she'd have to face questions from her superiors, scrutiny from her colleagues, and likely backlash from within her own department. But Clara May was never the type to shrink from responsibility. She had worked hard to get to this position, and no officer, no matter their rank or title, would use their badge as a weapon against innocent people, least of all under her watch. The drive back to the station was quiet. Clara's thoughts raced, her mind replaying every moment of the confrontation. She had seen officers like Miller before, those who wore their badges like armor, using their position to intimidate and dominate. But today, things had changed. She had stopped the cycle, and now it was her job to make sure it didn't happen again. When they arrived at the station, Clara wasted no time in filing the paperwork. The footage of the incident had already gone viral, and internal affairs had been notified. She didn't need anyone to tell her how serious this was. Officer Miller had crossed a line that he couldn't uncross, and the investigation would begin immediately. Clara stood in her office looking out at the skyline, the weight of the decision settling in. She had done the right thing. But this was only the beginning. There was a long road ahead, one that would require transparency, accountability, and most importantly, change. She wasn't just fighting for justice for herself, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, for those whose voices had been silenced by authority. As the hours passed, news outlets began to cover the story. Social media erupted in support of Clara, praising her for her swift action and the bravery it took to confront Officer Miller in front of the world. The hashtag #, Justice for Clara, trended nationwide, and people from all walks of life celebrated her courage to stand up and make a statement against police brutality and racial injustice. Meanwhile, back at the station, Clara received a call from her superior, Chief John Hawkins. "Clara, I've seen the footage. We need to talk, now." Clara stood still, bracing herself for the difficult conversation that was to come. She knew her actions would spark controversy, but she was ready. She had done what was right, and nothing would make her back down. In the chief's office, the conversation was tense. "Clara, I've always respected your judgment, but what you did today was extreme," Chief Hawkins said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "We don't handle situations like this in public. There are procedures, processes. You could have handled this behind closed doors." Clara didn't flinch. "And that's exactly what's wrong with this department. We've hidden behind closed doors for too long. Officers like Miller need to be held accountable, in the open. No more excuses." Hawkins exhaled sharply. "I know. But you've shaken things up. This will have consequences for you and for the department." Clara's gaze was unwavering. "The consequences have already been felt by those like Officer Miller. The system he used to exploit others is what needs to change, Chief. If you're not willing to make that change, then maybe I shouldn't be here." There was a long silence in the room. Hawkins's eyes softened as he took a deep breath. "You've made your point, Clara. I won't stand in your way. Do what you need to do. But know this, we'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time that day, Clara felt a sense of peace. She had taken a stand, and though it had cost her, it was also a victory. Officer Miller would face the consequences, and the department would have to reckon with its flaws. By the end of the day, the charges were official. Officer Miller was suspended without pay, and the investigation into his actions would continue. The entire department. It was a bright, bustling afternoon in downtown. The streets were crowded with people going about their business, some chatting, others rushing to get to their destinations. Among them was Detective Clara May, a black woman in her early 30s, known for her sharp mind and fearless demeanor. She had spent years working hard in law enforcement, rising through the ranks to become one of the top investigators in the department. Yet no matter how many accolades she had received or how respected she had become, there were still moments when her authority was questioned, especially because of her race. Today, it would be one of those moments. Clara had just finished a case when she stopped by a local coffee shop to grab a quick drink. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she noticed a commotion nearby. A police officer in full uniform was yelling at a group of teenagers who were gathered near a corner. Clara's sharp instincts told her something wasn't right. She moved closer, trying to observe from a distance. The officer, Officer Daniel Miller, was a familiar face around the precinct. He had built a reputation for being aggressive, and many of his colleagues had whispered about his questionable tactics, especially towards people of color. Clara had never directly interacted with him, but she had seen him in action before, always quick to escalate situations instead of diffusing them. Now, he was in the midst of arguing with the group, his words loud and harsh, laced with aggression. It was clear he was pushing the teenagers further into confrontation rather than trying to understand what was going on. Clara could see the frustration in their eyes. Something snapped inside her. "Hey, officer!" Clara called out as she stepped forward, her voice firm but controlled. "What's going on here?" Officer Miller turned around, clearly annoyed by her interruption. "Mind your business," he snapped, his face reddening. "These punks are causing a disturbance." Clara, who had dealt with enough incidents of racial profiling to last a lifetime, wasn't about to let this slide. "I'm sure you have a good reason to be so aggressive, but I don't see any reason to escalate things like this. Let's calm down and talk about this." Before she could finish speaking, Officer Miller sneered and took a step toward her, his body language challenging her authority. "Who do you think you are?" he asked, looking Clara up and down as though he didn't recognize her. "I'm a cop. You should be thanking me I don't throw you in the back of my car." Clara stood her ground, her posture unwavering. "I think you should calm down and check your attitude, officer. You're on duty, not playing some game. I won't stand by and watch you intimidate these kids." The officer's anger flared. In a split second, without warning, he reached forward and kicked Clara hard in the leg, knocking her back a few steps. The sudden act of violence stunned everyone around them. Clara's vision blurred with the sting of pain, but her resolve only grew stronger. She steadied herself, her instincts kicking in, ready to react, but she held back. She needed to be careful. This wasn't just about her. This was about justice, accountability, and making sure the system didn't fail those who needed it most. The crowd around them had started to murmur, some of the bystanders pulling out their phones to record the scene. Clara, blood boiling but focused, slowly stood up. She reached into her jacket, pulling out her badge with a swift motion. "You've made a mistake, Officer Miller," Clara said, her voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "I am Detective Clara May, and you're under arrest for assaulting a law enforcement officer. You're going to be held accountable for this." The officer's smug expression faltered. "You're what?" he stammered, disbelief evident in his voice. "This is a joke. You're just a—" Clara didn't wait for him to finish. She stepped forward and placed him under arrest, her hands swift and efficient. She knew the law, and she had the power to act on it. "You don't know who I am, do you, Officer Miller?" she added, her words slicing through the tension. "I'm your boss." The officer's eyes widened in realization as the crowd around them began to murmur louder. His arrogance was replaced with panic. What do you mean?" "I'm the chief of the district," Clara said, her voice firm as she handcuffed him. "You'll be reporting to me from now on." The scene was surreal. The crowd, once unsure of what was happening, now watched in shock as Clara led Officer Miller away. His once strong and commanding presence now seemed deflated. The very officer who had thought he could intimidate her and get away with it was now helpless, facing the consequences of his own actions.